This is BSS Sports.
Fires to the end zone. It's caught. It's Greg Lewis. Touchdown.
Brooks with one. Lets it fly at the horn. It's gone.
Here's Crosby with a burst of speed up the middle. Gets open. Scores.
A grand slam for A-Rod.
Pure genius from David Beckham. And it's in. Thierry Henry with a bullet. Touchdown.
With Thomas Brooks, Steve Schill, and Trevor Struthers. Only on 91X.
Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of BSS Sports. My name is Steven Schill here with Trevor Struthers, and the Pittsburgh Penguins are Stanley Cup champions. The 08-09 season was their last time they won it, and this time around they did it one game quicker than previously against the Detroit Red Wings, taking down the San Jose Sharks. So the Penguins win. Crosby fans across Canada are pleased. There's been no Canadian teams in the NHL playoffs, but Mr. Canada, per se, is in the finals and now a champion. So is this kind of a relief for Canadians that we had some kind of an interest in the final?
Not really. I feel like a lot of Canadians actually have distaste towards Sidney Crosby. Just, when I'm talking to people about hockey and I bring up, Sidney Crosby, it's not exactly somebody they look up to, per se.
I don't know if those are many women, but my boss is included in this one. She's been harassing me all week because she's just a Crosby fan and I'm a Sharks fan. The Penguins did it. They got Phil Kessel this year, so Phil's probably really thanking Toronto, but they did it with a goalie they weren't expecting to use, Matt Murray. What is the story with this? Why doesn't Andre Fleury play at all during this?
Well, because, obviously, he was hurt when the playoffs started. They had Zakhoff in there to begin the playoffs, and, he wasn't necessarily bad. He did have a rough game. They decided to turn to Matt Murray, who was also injured when the playoffs started, and then Murray just kind of ran with it. He did have that one bad game where Fleury got in there, but, ultimately, Matt Murray's been their guy since just after the first round started, and except for that one game where they went to Marc-Andre Fleury. Obviously, they made the right decision. They're Stanley Cup champions. You look at the final four goaltenders, none of which you really kind of expected to be there. Obviously, in the Stanley Cup final, it came down to Martin Jones, who was a backup to the Kings before getting a shot with San Jose. On the other side, you got Matt Murray, who it doesn't feel like it was that long ago when he was playing junior hockey for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds.
With the Sharks, the King kind of came into the season with the whole captaincy issue, and that kind of took spotlight, at least for a little bit, and the Sharks, they've always been a good team, they've always made the playoffs, and they've usually always dwindled away in the first and second round. What do you think is different with this year, and are they on the right track, or is this kind of one of the teams that they're going to make the finals this year, but you're not going to see them until they do a clean sweep of everybody and kind of go back to the rebuild mode?
I think they found the right coach for what they're trying to accomplish. They're an older, more veteran team that's trying to do what they did this year, just coming a bit short, though, from the ultimate goal. But they found Pete DeBoer, who was obviously coaching the Devils, went to a Stanley Cup there. Got to feel a little bit bad for Pete DeBoer, actually. He's 0-2 now in Cup finals. Ultimately, Pete DeBoer is a guy that had success pretty much all the way through, and they hired him. And he's the guy that struggled with coaching younger players. And he's a guy that is more of a let the veterans do their thing, and that's very much what San Jose is. And it's a good fit that ended up matching, and Steve Spott as an assistant coach there as well is a guy that might get an NHL head coaching job a few years down the road.
And do you think Joe Thornton and Brent Burns are going to shave or no?
Probably now. However, I do think both beards should be on their way to the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Joe Thornton's one is just greasy, for lack of a better term. I'm a fan of the beard, but that one I think is just a little bit too far.
Greasy is good when it comes to the playoffs.
Fair enough. All right, so just switching down to a lower tier kind of the NHL, the AHL championship is given to Cleveland, and we'll get to another team from Cleveland in a moment, but the Lake Erie Monsters take the AHL championship over the Hershey Bears. And if you don't know, the Lake Erie Monsters are the Columbus Blue Jackets farm team. This is good for the Columbus Blue Jackets?
Well, I just want to say for a second what a game that was. It was Game 4, and obviously the Monsters ended up sweeping the Bears. It was a tremendous game, 1-0 in overtime, and the goal was scored with 1.9 seconds left on the clock. So, that was a heck of a game. It'd be interesting to see what this does mean for the Blue Jackets. Obviously you would assume it means that they have a nice little pool of prospects there in Lake Erie. But, I mean, it wasn't that long ago when the Binghamton Senators won the Calder Cup that I can recall off the top of my head with starting goaltender like Robin Lehner and guys that eventually all came up to play in the NHL and with the Senators. And it didn't really get them anywhere. And I feel like you see that all around the league. Sometimes, when a team wins the Calder Cup, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to carry that success over into the NHL and find success there. So it'd be interesting to see what this means, but I definitely don't think the Blue Jackets are Stanley Cup bound anytime within the next 5 years.
Now, the Calder Cup is named after Frank Calder, who was the very first president of the National Hockey League, and we all know how the new Gary Bettman is going over, but I think Frank Calder was a very likable guy, and they also named the Calder Memorial Trophy, which is awarded to the Rookie of the Year in the National Hockey League, and this year the finalists that are being announced on the 22nd of this month our Philadelphia Flyers defenseman Shane Gostisbehere. I'm totally messed that up. Trevor, you want to help me?
Gostisbehere.
Thank you. Edmonton Oilers forward Connor McDavid nailed it, and Chicago Blackhawks forward Artemi Panarin. Did I get that one?
Yeah, you got that one.
I like these international names. So they're named the finalist for the Calder the Calder Memorial Trophy, not the Calder Cup, for the top rookie in the NHL. So one of those three. And is it kind of unfair that you have a big name like Connor McDavid in there? Because the other three, obviously by my lack of pronunciation, haven't really gotten much, per se, spotlight.
Well, yeah, not to get too much into this, but, the surprising one, the obvious one was probably McDavid. Even though he was hurt for a good chunk of the year, he still put up fantastic numbers. Shane Gostisbehere is probably the surprising one over a guy like a Jack Eichel. And Panarin's a guy that's not exactly a fan favorite for this thing. Played with Patrick Kane all year in Chicago, and he's just barely making the age limit for the Calder. I think he's 24 years old. But, this was his rookie season, and he had one heck of a season. He'd maybe be my favorite to win it, but I think you got to go with Connor McDavid. And also to tie this back to the Stanley Cup final, as you mentioned, tying in McDavid there with Sidney Crosby. Sidney Crosby won the Conn Smythe Trophy last night, and I really think it should have been Phil Kessel. Had the better playoff, had the better series than Sidney Crosby, but I feel like there was a lot of reputation there for Crosby winning the Conn Smythe.
It's always the problem with names that are generally in the spotlight more than others. Phil Kessel in the spotlight for things that Crosby isn't, like eating burgers and stuff, which is totally fine.
Well, he'll get to do that at the Stanley Cup. That's all that matters.
Now that's greasy. I'll give you that. That is greasy. For some sadder news, though, Gordie Howe has passed away. He was born in Saskatchewan, but he passed away in the United States. And the guy played almost 2,000 games, close to 1,000 goals, over 1,000 assists, and just under 2,000 points. They call him Mr. Hockey. You could call him Mr. Canada. You could call him a lot of things. Just this whole year in general is seeing all these really kind of historic people passed away. And I don't know what it is with 2016, but I'm starting to get scared myself.
Well, yeah, obviously losing somebody like Gordie Howe just after losing somebody like Muhammad Ali, obviously those are two legends that their names will obviously never die and they'll always be around. And, you hear somebody like Wayne Gretzky talk about what Gordie Howe meant to him growing up and getting to meet Gordie Howe and what that meant and what it meant to pass his records, things like that. It's kind of tremendous to hear somebody that's considered the great one speaking so highly of Gordie Howe, and he considers Gordie Howe the great one. But also, Gordie Howe is, in my opinion, I don't know if he had a consecutive game streak for a long time or anything like that, but because obviously I wasn't around when he was playing, he is, in my opinion, the NHL's Iron Man. Be able to play into your 50s in the NHL, that's something that's never going to happen again.
That's very, very true, and I'm surprised that's not highlighted enough. Trevor, how old are your parents?
A little bit older than that, I think, but...
Could you imagine, though, like maybe 3 years ago, them going to play in the NHL with Sidney Crosby and other people like them?
No, I can't, and I don't know if we'll ever get to see anything like this, but he had a chance to play with his son, like in professional hockey, and that's something that, it's probably never going to happen again.
It's pretty cool, though, nonetheless. Switching over to basketball. The Cleveland Cavaliers, well, Cleveland in general, they won the Calder Cup, but the NBA championship is still, the Bill Russell Trophy is still up for grabs. Now, Cleveland smacked the Warriors at home. Like, the first game back in Cleveland, they smacked them. Thought this was going to go kind of like the Toronto series, where Cleveland was just going to basically dominate at home, but for the fourth game, wasn't the case. Warriors ended up taking that. However, Draymond Green... deciding to take things into his own hands. deciding to punch LeBron or take him out, however you want to word it, getting suspended for Game 5, going back to the Golden State, where we were hoping that we were going to, or at least I was hoping we were going to see kind of a double whammy with the Bay Area taking home 2 championships at the same time, but now it's just up to the Warriors to do it. But Draymond Green out, he's a chippy player. Still think the Warriors are going to be able to hold off the Cavaliers. I mean, Draymond Green is a really big part of that and one of their big men, but Cleveland doesn't really have any per se big men, so the Warriors are going to have to kind of rely on Bogut. But do you think this is going to be a huge deal for just one game?
I don't think it will be a big deal for one game. I mean, obviously they have a couple games even to work with. I think the interesting thing about this suspension is that it happened upon review pretty much from NBA officials to determine that it was a flagrant what he did to LeBron there to get the suspension. And so maybe some people are thinking the fix is in and that the NBA wants a long series here. But Draymond Green has walked the fine line of messing with the family jewels this playoffs, and he's done it one too many times.
Well, I mean, there's talks that he should have been suspended in the previous series as well, and would you agree with that?
Yeah, probably, and that may have had something to do with this suspension. Although it's just one game, it's the NBA Finals we're talking about.
Well, that's what Bogut said. He said, one of the things that would have helped with the NBA's decision to suspend him is looking back at the review and saying this guy has a history, kind of like Matt Cook of the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have a history, you're more likely to get the hammer thrown at you. To throw a hockey tie-in, I mean, if you remember what happened to Rafi Torres, he got that massive, I think it was a 20-something game suspension, which pretty much ended his career. I think he's still playing down in the minors, but it pretty much ended his career in the NHL because he was a repeat offender that just wasn't thinking and made a lot of bad mistakes.
Now, I know you were talking about hockey a second ago, and now that hockey's over, we're taking things down to the greens. And Brooke Henderson, at age 18, does the unthinkable in golf, or more or less unimaginable, per se.
It's not exactly unimaginable. I mean, the interesting thing about it, she's 18 years old from Smiths Falls, so it's a great local story. I mean, the person that she beat, Lydia Ko, is 19 years old and had won 3 straight majors, so it's definitely more common to see young female phenoms in the LPGA than it is the actual PGA. What makes this story so great is the fact that Brooke Henderson's obviously Canadian, and you get that local tie-in, and it seems like she's going to be great for a long time. And with golf back in the Olympics for the first time since 1904, there is a good chance that Brooke Henderson could be bringing home a medal to Canada. With definitely, if she keeps this play up. I mean, she won a major this weekend, right? It's the Women's PGA Championship that she won, and she's the youngest player to actually win a major on the LPGA Tour, 18 years old. And so, yeah, it's definitely looking good as to can they medal when it comes to the Olympics.
Now, you said in there, could be good for a long time, but isn't there kind of a bit of a scare? Because, I mean, we've seen Eugenie Bouchard do really well in tennis for a little bit, but then kind of just washed away.
I guess there's always that kind of skepticism, especially now because Jeannie did, she was so good and she's fallen off a bit. I think it's going to be a little bit different with Brooke. Obviously, golf is a bit of a different game than tennis. Really, what it comes down to is your overall performance and nothing else. It doesn't really matter how your opponent plays. Where in tennis, obviously, it does matter. So I think it's going to be a lot easier for Brooke to manage her game and be able to maintain how good she is. And it should be interesting because, as I mentioned, Lydia Ko, 19 years old, Brooke Henderson, 18 years old. This is a potential female golf rivalry that we'll be watching for the next 20 years.
So that's it for this episode of BSS Sports. We've officially passed the 1-year mark since we started, so many months ago. Trevor, thanks for tagging along for this. Just want to say, kind of talked about it one day when we were sitting in class in which we just graduated from Loyals College, so kind of cool to think about it. We started this a year ago, planning on continuing it for another year and maybe even beyond that. You never know. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or I guess like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. As they say, check us out on YouTube, archiving at BSS Productions. For myself, Stephen Schill, and Trevor Struthers, we will be in contact with you next Monday.